Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts, inventions, and the quiet little histories of objects that so often go unnoticed. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist of forgotten inventions. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode of Forgotten Inventions. The first tool I would like to tell you about is the shadoof, a device from around 3000 BCE, used most famously in ancient Egypt, but known elsewhere too. The shadoof was nothing more than a long wooden pole, balanced carefully on a pivot, with a counterweight at one end, and a bucket or container at the other. One might call it the simplest of levers. And indeed, it is a physical demonstration of the principle Archimedes would later describe: give me a place to stand, and I will move the world. The shadoof did not move the world, of course, but it moved water. And in societies where rainfall was scarce and the Nile flowed steady and unbothered, that was enough. Farmers depended on it as faithfully as the sun itself, using its predictable motion to bridge the eternal gap between dry soil and the life-giving river. One does not often think of civilization rising on the shoulders of such a quiet device. And yet, without it, the story of Egyptian agriculture might have flowed differently, like a river wandering from its banks. With the shadoof, a single person could raise water from a river or canal, and pour it into irrigation channels to nourish dry fields. Its counterweight allowed the arm to swing slowly downward, to dip the bucket into water, and then upward, almost effortlessly, to empty the load. The design was so efficient, so modest, that very little changed in its form over thousands of years. The fulcrum could be made from a sturdy forked post, often anchored deeply in the earth, while the long beam was usually fashioned from wood strong enough to support the repeated dipping motion. In this way, the device itself acted almost as an extension of the worker's own body, lengthening the reach of human arms into something far more capable. It was technology without ornament, simplicity shaped for survival. Some shadoofs could lift as much as 20 liters at once, enough to moisten furrows, quench animals, or fill a cistern slowly over the course of patient hours. The device itself was silent, save perhaps for the creak of wood or the drip of water returning to earth. And yet, it was the ancestor of pumps, aqueducts, and complex irrigation systems. Even today, in quiet corners of rural landscapes, one might still see a shadoof standing like a watchful crane bird, tilting, rising, lowering, repeating a motion that has lasted 5,000 years. The very slowness of it, the gentle rhythm of scoop and pour, was perhaps its greatest beauty. For farming, this was not excitement, but survival, achieved by the most unremarkable of means. And survival was enough. When the fields of barley and wheat rippled softly in the desert breeze, it was the hidden work of the shadoof that whispered beneath them, unseen yet indispensable. You may not care. And that is completely fine. But I do. Because the shadoof reminds us that even the simplest contraption can be the quiet backbone of an entire civilization. The treadwheel crane, my gentle listener, appeared around 2700 BCE in Mesopotamia, where heavy stones often needed lifting for construction. Picture, if you will, a great wooden wheel, large enough for a person to walk inside, like a quiet, oversized hamster wheel. As the worker walked, the wheel turned, winding a rope slowly around a drum, and in that careful winding, stones and materials were lifted upward. It was an early exploration of mechanical advantage, a way of trading effort for power, by allowing steady steps to become rising force. The crane was typically anchored to a wooden framework, braced against strain, so that the load did not sway too dangerously. And though it seems simple to us now, it marked one of humanity's earliest known experiments with harnessing rotational motion to do work. In Mesopotamian cities, such cranes were particularly useful in the construction of temples, ziggurats, and city walls. Each stone, each brick, carried a quiet weight of civilization itself. Without such devices, lifting blocks weighing hundreds of kilograms would have required many laborers straining together. With the treadwheel, a single individual, or perhaps two, could accomplish the same lifting task with fewer hands. The pace was slow. Very slow. But reliable, like a steady heartbeat of labor. It was safer too, since the wheel prevented the sudden jerks or slips that human hands alone might bring. And so, in the rhythm of feet pressing wood, buildings rose into the sky brick by brick, whispering of a culture that valued persistence more than speed. The treadwheel crane was not only a tool of utility. It was a demonstration of how movement could be transformed, step by step, into the raising of structures that outlasted their builders. Its principle remained unchanged for millennia, reappearing in Roman construction, in medieval cathedrals, and even in shipyards centuries later. Some cranes of the Middle Ages were nearly identical in design to their Mesopotamian ancestors, showing how little improvement was needed once the idea was found. The silence of the treadwheel, broken only by the sound of footsteps within its wooden circle, reminds us that the work of building civilizations is not always grand or swift. Sometimes, it is the quiet repetition of an ancient mechanism. You may not care about such a wheel. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For the treadwheel crane was a patient companion to humanity's urge to build. The so-called Baghdad battery, though debated, is one of those curiosities of ancient technology that seems too quiet to be remarkable, and yet too strange to ignore. Archaeologists discovered small clay jars, dating to around the 3rd century BCE, in Mesopotamia, each containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. The vessel was sealed with bitumen, a sticky natural asphalt, to hold the pieces in place and to prevent liquid from seeping out too quickly. When filled with an acidic substance, such as vinegar or fermented grape juice, these simple components could create a small electric potential, much like the cells in a modern battery. The current produced was not strong, only about 1 volt, but even that gentle spark suggests experimentation far ahead of its time. Whether by design or accident, it whispered of a world where people understood more than we sometimes imagine. Some believe the jars were used not as true batteries but as storage containers for sacred scrolls or ritual objects. Yet, tests by modern scientists have shown that, when liquid was added, the jars could indeed generate electricity. This has led to the possibility that they were used for electroplating, coating small objects in thin layers of precious metals. Imagine a craftsman dipping a small figurine into a solution, then, through a trickle of unseen current, the surface of the object slowly acquiring the sheen of gold. The process would have been slow and delicate, but sufficient to add beauty to a ritual charm or to a piece of jewelry. And perhaps, to those who performed it, the transformation seemed not scientific but magical, as if the metals themselves wished to embrace one another. The jars therefore straddle the line between technology and mystery. A half-forgotten experiment, humming silently in the past. Today, the Baghdad battery remains a point of quiet debate, not of excitement but of speculation. We cannot say with certainty if it was deliberately crafted as a power source, or simply resembled one by accident of design. Yet it lingers in textbooks and museum cases, a reminder of how fragments of history can confuse us with their simplicity. Even if it was never meant as a battery, its components reflect the ingenuity of people who worked with copper, iron, clay, and resin thousands of years ago. They knew the properties of materials intimately, in the way only constant practice teaches. And so, Whether it carried current or not, the clay jar with its copper and iron still stands as an ancestor, however distant, of the devices that power our lives today. You may not care. And that is completely fine. But I do. For even the humblest jar, sitting silently in the dust, might contain the faint echo of a spark. The hand-powered lathe, around 2400 BCE in Egypt, was among the first tools to turn wood with deliberate symmetry. Imagine two wooden posts set upright, supporting a piece of timber held carefully between them. A cord, sometimes of leather, was wrapped around the wood, and when pulled back and forth, it spun the timber in alternating directions. A craftsman, crouched nearby, held a sharp chisel against the surface, shaving curls of wood as the piece rotated. The process was slow, halting even. For the wood did not spin continuously but rocked back and forth with each pull of the cord. Yet this gentle rocking was enough to create bowls, spindles, and tool handles with an evenness that the human hand alone could not achieve. It was one of the earliest demonstrations of using motion, not just pressure, to shape materials, an ancestor to countless later machines. In ancient Egypt, such lathes may have been used to craft furniture, legs, beads, and ritual objects of wood and ivory. The work was specialized, requiring patience and skill, for the tool's rhythm left little room for haste. Later, apprentices learned by observing, pulling the cord steadily, while masters guided the chisels with quiet precision. Over centuries, refinements emerged. Sometimes a bow was used, moving back and forth to keep the timber spinning, which left the craftsman's other hand free. Even so, the essence remained unchanged, wood turning against a blade, slowly revealing smooth shapes from rough material. To hold such an object, perfectly round, must have seemed a kind of quiet wonder, as if a tree's uneven trunk had been persuaded to adopt geometry itself. The hand-powered lathe's legacy is immense, for it introduced the concept of rotational shaping, a principle that survives in every modern lathe, from metal workshops to pottery studios. Later cultures expanded on it, creating continuous rotation with flywheels and foot pedals. But in that early Egyptian form, it was still little more than two posts, a cord, and a tool. Its simplicity belied its importance. Without it, the shaping of symmetrical objects might have remained clumsy and irregular, far slower to refine. The lathe thus became not just a tool, but a symbol of persistence, patience, and the idea that turning, slow, even turning, reveals forms hidden inside the raw material. You may not care about such a rocking spindle. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the lathe teaches us that sometimes progress comes not in leaps, but in steady circles. The war chariot, around 2000 BCE among the Indo-Iranians, was a far different kind of invention, swift where the lathe was slow, but still bound to wheels and wood. Imagine a light cart, two-wheeled, drawn by horses across the open plains. Its frame was crafted of wood and leather, built for speed, not for weight. Upon it stood one or two warriors, a driver controlling the horses, and an archer or spearman delivering force from a distance. The chariot was a revolution in mobility, allowing armies to strike quickly, retreat, and maneuver in ways that foot soldiers could not. Though it was a machine of war, its construction required the same patient skill as any craft, wheels bound with sinew, axles polished with care, horses trained to run together. It was not brutality alone, but technology, that defined its strength. For several centuries, the chariot reshaped battlefields from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from India to China. Kings were depicted riding them in carved reliefs, symbols of prestige as much as instruments of strategy. The very sight of them, wheels turning, dust rising, must have stirred both fear and awe. Yet, as with many inventions, their time was limited. The rise of cavalry, mounted warriors riding directly upon horses, made the chariot increasingly obsolete. Horses grew stronger through selective breeding, able to carry riders with armor and weapons, making the intermediary platform unnecessary. Slowly, the chariot moved from battlefield dominance to ceremonial role, then finally to disappearance. Still, the chariot's influence was lasting. It introduced new techniques of harnessing, spoked wheels that were lighter than solid ones, and a rethinking of how humans might combine speed, mobility, and power. It was not just an invention of war, but also of transportation, influencing carts and wagons long afterward. Its fading into history is a reminder that inventions are often temporary, serving for centuries and then vanishing into memory. You may not care for the war chariot. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For even in its obsolescence, it whispers of a time when wood, leather, and wheel carried the weight of empire across the open steppe. The water clock, or clepsydra, emerged in Babylon around 1800 BC, and unlike the chariot, it was not meant for war but for measuring the silent passage of time. The principle was simple: a container filled with water, with a small hole allowing liquid to drip out at a steady pace. As the water level fell, it marked the hours. Some versions instead filled from the bottom, with rising water indicating the passage of minutes and hours. In both cases, time was measured not by shadows of the sun or movements of the stars, but by the quiet constancy of dripping water. It was an early attempt to domesticate time, to make it measurable even at night, when sundials were useless, or indoors, where light could not reach. These clocks were often crafted from stone or clay, with interior markings that showed divisions of the hour. They were not perfectly accurate, for the flow of water could change with temperature, pressure, or imperfections in the hole. Yet they were steady enough to regulate rituals, to mark court proceedings, or to pace the length of speeches. In some cultures, orators were granted a clepsydra's worth of water to speak, their words measured as much by patience as by argument. The dripping, steady and unhurried, became a companion to human affairs, silent but persistent. It was a sound of passing time that asked for no attention, and yet shaped the rhythm of life. The clepsydra's legacy endured through Greece, Rome, and into medieval Europe, where refinements added gears, floats, and indicators. But in its earliest form, it was nothing more than a pot, a hole, and water yielding to gravity. Perhaps that was its beauty, that such a simple thing could serve as a clock, long before springs and pendulums arrived. Even today, when we glance at digital displays, we echo a history that began with drops falling in darkness. You may not care for the water clock. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For it reminds us that time itself was once measured not by machines of precision, but by the quiet patience of water leaving its vessel. Let us drift now into the glow of another invention. One that shimmered gently in Mesopotamia around 1700 BCE. This was the glass-making furnace. A quiet chamber of heat that made possible the earliest production of glass vessels and beads. The glass-making furnace was, at its core, a controlled fire, shaped carefully by clay walls and stone foundations, able to reach temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius. Within it, humble ingredients, sand rich in silica, soda from plant ash, and lime to stabilize, were melted together into a glowing, molten substance. The result was not metal, nor stone, but something between, something translucent, fragile, and luminous. Early glass did not arrive in sheets or panes, but as beads, small vessels, and amulets. These were often cast in molds, sometimes by pressing molten glass against a clay core, which would later be removed to leave a hollow form. The furnace itself was the enabler, its steady heat coaxing transformation from ordinary grains into material that caught and bent light. To those who first saw it, glass must have seemed closer to magic than craft. A substance unlike any found in nature, birthed by fire itself. In Mesopotamia, such glass was rare, treasured not for utility but for beauty. Beads were strung into necklaces, pendants carried as charms, small containers held oils or perfumes. The colors varied depending on the minerals in the sand. Copper produced blue or green, manganese gave purple, iron brought brown or black. Some pieces were opaque, others translucent, shimmering faintly like captured water. The furnace workers themselves must have toiled in heat and smoke, feeding wood into the fire, monitoring crucibles, and judging by eye the moment when sand surrendered to fluid. Their skill was not measured in speed, but in patience, for cooling glass too quickly made it shatter, while cooling too slowly dulled its form. Thus, even after leaving the furnace, the material required careful treatment, wrapped in time's embrace before it could be handled. The furnace marked an important transition. It showed that humans were not only shaping materials they found, but also creating entirely new ones. Glass had no direct counterpart in the natural world, save for volcanic obsidian, and even that was formed by accident of geology. Here, by contrast, people called it forth deliberately, shaping light in solid form. Over centuries, glassmaking spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt, then to Rome, where techniques such as glassblowing would later emerge. But its beginning was quiet, almost unnoticed, a handful of beads cooling on a shelf in a dim workshop. You may not care for the glassmaking furnace. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For in its flickering heat, humanity first learned to melt earth into fragile beauty, and in doing so, to turn fire into art. Ah! My drowsy companion. Let us float now to Egypt around 1500 BC, where a most unremarkable yet enduring invention first appeared, the pin-tumbler lock. A device of wood and pegs, not glamorous, not mighty. And yet, a quiet guardian of doors. The pin-tumbler lock of ancient Egypt was not made of brass or steel as later versions would be, but of wood, shaped carefully, fitted with pegs that slid into position to secure a bolt. Imagine a door, perhaps leading into a storeroom or a chamber, where valuables were kept safe from wandering hands. A wooden key, large and often resembling a small comb, was carved with pegs that matched the lock's internal pins. When inserted, the key lifted those pins into alignment, allowing the bolt to slide free. The mechanism seems humble to us now, but it represented a leap. No longer was security based only on weighty bars or guards, but on a hidden puzzle within the wood itself. The lock's cleverness lay in its invisibility. One could not simply see how it worked, one had to know. Archaeologists have uncovered examples of these locks in tombs and ruins, often large in size, sometimes more than 30 centimeters long. Their scale seems almost comical compared to the tiny keys we carry today, but their principle was the same. Each pin acted as a barrier, each key a solution. In an age where bronze and gold gleamed, it was wood that quietly kept treasures safe. Over time, this early design faded from common use, forgotten for centuries, only to be rediscovered and refined in much later ages. And yet, its idea endured, that security could be achieved not through brute force, but through subtle alignment, through hidden order, through the soft shifting of small parts inside a casing. The pin-tumbler lock became the ancestor of many locks we still use today, its principle surviving across millennia. Modern locks may be smaller, made of brass and steel, operated with keys no larger than a fingertip, but within them the same principle rests, pins rising and falling, aligning with a key cut to match. The Egyptian carpenters who built those wooden bolts may never have known how far their invention would travel, but their work whispered forward across history. You may not care about such a wooden contraption, forgotten until its rediscovery. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For the pin-tumbler lock reminds us that even security itself can be crafted from patience, from wood, and from the quiet fitting of pins into place. Ah! My soft-thinking listener. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to the plains of ancient India around 1200 BC, where one of humanity's quietly transformative inventions first appeared, the iron plow. Though it may seem unremarkable, it changed the way soil was moved, seeds were planted, and life itself was cultivated. The iron plough of early India was a simple tool, yet heavy with purpose. Its body was usually made of wood, reinforced with an iron share, a thin blade that could cut through soil more effectively than stone or bronze predecessors. Farmers would attach it to draft animals, such as oxen, which pulled it slowly across fields, turning the earth in a repeated, patient rhythm. Unlike modern plows, the iron share was not always curved or complex, but it allowed soil to be broken apart more deeply, aerating the ground and preparing it for planting. Its design emphasized durability over speed, and its weight was distributed carefully to balance efficiency with the strength of the animals pulling it. The rhythm of plowing, animal steps, blade cutting, soil lifting and falling, was like a quiet heartbeat across the flat expanses of early farmland. This tool gradually replaced earlier wooden or bronze plows, which required more effort and often failed to reach the denser soils of certain regions. Iron's durability made the work less taxing, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas, sustain more crops, and support growing populations. Handles were sometimes reinforced, and the plowshare could be replaced when worn, showing early understanding of modular repair. Farmers would guide the plow by hand, often walking behind the animals, adjusting depth, angle, and direction with small, deliberate movements. The plowing process was slow, repetitive, and unhurried, producing furrows that would later guide seeds into orderly rows. In this quiet repetition lay both labor and innovation, technology emerging gently through everyday work, rather than sudden brilliance. Although later plows evolved into more complex forms with wheels, iron coulters, and multiple blades, the early Indian iron plow remains significant for its simplicity and effectiveness. It is a reminder that small, steady improvements in farming technology can ripple through societies, shaping economies, population growth, and settlement patterns without drama or fanfare. Even today, archaeologists studying early plows find themselves marveling not at spectacle, but at quiet ingenuity, the careful marriage of animal, tool, and soil. You may not care about a blunt iron blade dragging through mud. And that is completely fine. But I do. For in its unassuming repetition, the iron plow sowed not only seeds in the earth, but also the foundations of human sustenance itself. Ah! My soft-thinking listener. Let us drift, very gently, to China around 1000 BC, where an invention quietly changed the way warriors could send arrows across fields, the Chinese crossbow. The Chinese crossbow was a mechanically triggered bow, designed so that the energy stored in a drawn string could be released with a simple press of a trigger. Unlike a hand-drawn bow, the crossbow allowed the user to hold tension indefinitely, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to release the arrow. The body of the weapon was typically made of wood, reinforced with animal sinew or horn for flexibility, and the string might have been crafted from twisted fibers capable of withstanding repeated tension. Early versions used a simple wooden latch as a trigger mechanism, which, when pressed, released the string and sent the bolt toward its target. The crossbow's invention represented a clever understanding of mechanics, allowing human strength to be converted into stored energy and then discharged accurately, consistently, and with relatively little effort. It was not flashy, not grandiose, but profoundly effective, quietly shifting the balance of battlefield tactics without drama, relying instead on the precision of simple components working in harmony. In practical use, the crossbow allowed soldiers to fire bolts at a steady pace, even if they were not as strong as their opponents. It could pierce armor at short range, and its portability meant it could be carried along with infantry or mounted units. Soldiers could be trained to operate it more quickly than longbows, because drawing the string by hand required less raw strength and more repetitive technique. Workshops producing crossbows refined materials, perfecting triggers, stocks, and prods. The careful shaping of wood, the tensioning of strings, and the consistent manufacture of bolts all demonstrate an early understanding of standardization and mechanical reliability. Crossbows, while silent in their operation, had a profound and measured effect on military organization and strategy, subtly dictating formations, range, and timing of battles. Although the crossbow would eventually be superseded by firearms powered by gunpowder, its principle endured for centuries. Its mechanically stored energy and triggered release became a model for later devices, inspiring future engineers in both East and West. The invention itself was a quiet testament to human curiosity and experimentation with forces of tension, release, and leverage, long before modern machines made such ideas commonplace. You may not care for a wooden bow and a simple latch. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the Chinese crossbow reminds us that sometimes, the cleverness of an invention lies not in spectacle or speed, but in the subtle harnessing of energy, patience, and precision, quietly altering the course of history without a sound. My gentle listener, let us now drift softly to Assyria around 700 BC, where one of the most quietly persistent inventions first appeared, the Archimedean screw. Though later attributed to Archimedes in the Mediterranean centuries afterward, its earliest forms were already raising water from canals and rivers in Mesopotamia with patient, repetitive motion. The Archimedean screw was, at its heart, a simple tube wrapped with a helical surface inside, mounted at an angle so that water could be lifted as the screw rotated. Workers turned the device by hand, or sometimes used animals to provide steady, continuous motion. As the screw turned, water was trapped in the pockets between the helix in the tube, gradually rising from a lower source into an irrigation channel or storage cistern. The motion was slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic, the liquid moving inch by inch, following the rhythm of rotation. Its principle was mechanical advantage at its quietest and simplest. A small amount of rotational effort could transport large volumes of water over vertical distances otherwise difficult to manage. Even in its earliest form, it represented a sophisticated understanding of physics, applied to the practical needs of agriculture and daily life. In Assyrian agriculture, the Archimedean screw allowed irrigation systems to reach lands previously too dry for consistent cultivation. Farmers, engineers, and laborers coordinated carefully. One or more people turned the screw while another guided the water to furrows, gardens, or reservoirs. The construction of the device demanded precision, for the angle of incline, the pitch of the helix, and the smoothness of the tube determined efficiency. Too steep, and water slipped back; too shallow, and effort increased unnecessarily. The materials varied: wood, bound with waterproof clay, sometimes reinforced with metal where available. And the sound of operation, the faint swish of water caught in pockets and released, the gentle creak of the wooden frame, was a quiet companion to daily life, a rhythm repeated for hours without interruption. Though later named after Archimedes in the Hellenistic world, the device itself endured across cultures for centuries, inspiring water-lifting technologies in Egypt, Greece, and beyond. Its principle remains the same today in modern pumps and screw conveyors: slow rotation, steady force, and the unhurried movement of liquid from one place to another. It is not thrilling. It does not roar. And yet, it is essential, reliable, and quietly transformative. You may not care for a slanted tube of wood or metal. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For the Archimedean screw reminds us that even the simplest spiraling motion, repeated over and over, can lift not only water, but the very foundations of civilization itself. Let us now drift softly to Byzantium around 600 BC, where one of the quietest yet curiously destructive inventions first appeared, the Greek fire grenades. Though their use was practical and martial rather than domestic, their construction was humble, their mechanism simple, and their effect persistent. The Greek fire grenade was, in essence, a small terracotta vessel filled with flammable liquid. The clay was molded and fired to create a durable container, capable of holding volatile substances without leaking prematurely. Inside, a mixture of oils, resin, and possibly other combustible ingredients was stored, intended to ignite when the vessel was thrown or broken. The opening was often sealed with a plug or stopper, sometimes dipped in wax, to prevent accidental discharge. Users would handle these grenades carefully, carrying them in baskets or small crates, mindful of the thin line between a functional weapon and a disastrous mishap. The act of throwing one, then hearing it break and release flame, must have been brief and sudden, yet the preparation, the careful shaping, filling, and sealing, was slow, deliberate, and almost ritualistic in its patience. In practice, Greek fire grenades were employed during sieges or naval confrontations, meant to set enemy structures, ships, or supplies alight. Their small size made them manageable, unlike larger incendiary devices, and allowed soldiers to use them at relatively close range. The production required skill in choosing the right clay, mixing liquids to the proper consistency, and sealing the vessel so it would survive until needed. Terracotta's thermal resistance was crucial, as heating or friction could prematurely ignite the contents. Though the concept seems violent, the process itself was methodical, an interplay of material science and careful observation, where one misstep could ruin an entire batch. Even the flammable liquid had to be prepared with attention to density and viscosity, so it would spread properly once the container broke. Though the Greek fire grenade would eventually be overshadowed by more sophisticated incendiaries and, much later, gunpowder weapons, its principle endured in the minds of military engineers, that controlled destruction could be engineered in small, portable vessels. It was an early lesson in chemical manipulation, material choice, and containment, long before modern chemistry was codified. You may not care about a tiny clay pot filled with flammable liquid. And that is completely fine. But I do. For even in its quiet, contained danger, the Greek fire grenade demonstrates the patient ingenuity of human hands, shaping, filling, sealing, creating a tool that, though unremarkable to some, quietly changed the mechanics of warfare in its day. Ah, my soft-thinking listener. Let us now drift, very gently, to Greece around 500 BC, where one of the quietest marvels of mechanical ingenuity first appeared, the polybolos, a repeating ballista. Though its purpose was martial, its design was surprisingly clever, and its operation, automatic by ancient standards, was slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic. The polybolos was, at its essence, an ancient automatic catapult, designed to launch multiple bolts in succession without requiring manual reloading after each shot. It consisted of a torsion-powered frame, often constructed from twisted ropes or sinews, providing the energy to hurl projectiles. The mechanism included a flat wooden magazine or trough, holding bolts ready for firing, and a chain or ratchet system that advanced each bolt into position. As the lever was drawn back, a bolt was seated, the tension released, and the missile flew forward. Then the mechanism reset automatically, advancing the next bolt into place. To the casual observer, the polybolos may seem like nothing more than a cumbersome wooden frame, yet its clever synchronization of torsion, ratchet, and feeding system was an early demonstration of repetitive motion engineering, centuries before steam or clockwork mechanisms would formalize similar ideas. In the field, the polybolos allowed armies to maintain a continuous rate of fire, a kind of mechanical patience that supplemented human strength. The operation required steady, careful maintenance, torsion ropes had to be kept at consistent tension, the magazine needed bolts properly aligned, and all wooden components were subject to warping from moisture or wear. Engineers of the time had to understand the subtle interplay of springiness, friction, and leverage. Even the projectiles themselves were crafted with attention to weight, length, and fletching, or lack thereof, so that the mechanism would function reliably. The machine's repeated motion, once set in rhythm, was quietly mesmerizing, a cycle of draw, release, and advance, over and over, until all bolts were expended or the operator halted it. Although eventually forgotten with the rise of gunpowder weapons, the polybolos remains remarkable for its early use of automation, feeding, and continuous operation. Its principle, a mechanical system performing a repeated task without constant human intervention, echoes in later siege engines, automatic crossbows, and even modern manufacturing. It is not dazzling in color or shape, it does not roar or sparkle. Yet in its quiet, persistent repetition, it demonstrates ingenuity and patience, the careful orchestration of parts working together over time. You may not care about a wooden catapult feeding bolts automatically. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For the polybolos reminds us that sometimes the brilliance of an invention lies not in spectacle, but in the quiet, measured repetition of its mechanism, quietly shaping the world from behind a simple frame of wood and rope. Let us drift now, ever so slowly, to China around 400 BC, where one of the quietest yet subtly ingenious inventions first appeared, the south-pointing chariot. Though not widely remembered today, it was a mechanical marvel of guidance, a device designed to indicate direction without relying on magnets, long before compasses became common. The south-pointing chariot was, at its core, a wheeled vehicle with a carefully crafted mechanical figure mounted atop it. This figure, often a small humanoid or symbolic pointer, remained oriented toward a fixed cardinal direction, usually south, regardless of the chariot's turning. The mechanism relied on a series of differential gears hidden beneath the chariot's body, which subtly translated the motion of the wheels into rotation of the pointer in the opposite direction of turns. As the wheels traversed roads, the pointer quietly adjusted, compensating for each twist and curve. The effect was slow, deliberate, and endlessly precise for its day. No compass, no magnet, just the elegant interplay of wheels, axles, and gears translating distance and rotation into orientation. Craftsmen constructing such a device needed patience, skill, and meticulous understanding of ratios, wheel diameters, and the minute tolerances of wooden cogs and axles. In practical use, the south-pointing chariot could guide travelers, officials, or armies across terrain, reducing the risk of losing one's way over unfamiliar roads. It did not travel quickly, nor was it flashy, but its quiet reliability was remarkable in an age before magnetic navigation. The chariot's wheels had to be uniform, the gear teeth evenly carved, and the pointer's rotation finely balanced, so even a small discrepancy could accumulate over distance, introducing error. Observers might notice only the stillness of the figure's orientation against the turning body of the chariot, a paradoxical calm within motion. The process of making, adjusting, and using the device was a lesson in patience, a reminder that careful engineering and repetitive observation can achieve results without speed, force, or spectacle. Although the south-pointing chariot was eventually abandoned, largely replaced by compasses and simpler forms of directional aids, its principle of mechanically encoding motion into directional guidance endured as a quiet inspiration for later engineers. The idea that movement of wheels could be transformed into information, that rotation could become instruction, is subtle yet profound. It is not a weapon, nor a vehicle of grandeur, but a testament to human ingenuity and careful measurement. You may not care about a wheeled chariot with a pointing figure atop it. And that is perfectly fine. But I do. For the south-pointing chariot reminds us that even in stillness, and through quiet gears and wheels, humans have always sought to find their way. Patiently, mechanically, and ever so slowly. Let us now drift gently to Greece around 300 BC, where one of the quietest marvels of human ingenuity first appeared, the Antikythera mechanism. Though small and metallic, it carried within it the whispered knowledge of stars, planets, and time itself, centuries ahead of its era. The Antikythera mechanism was, at its core, a compact device of bronze gears and dials, housed in a wooden frame, designed to model the movements of celestial bodies. It could predict eclipses, track lunar phases, and even display the cycles of the ancient Olympic Games. Each gear was cut with meticulous precision, teeth meshing quietly in sequence, transferring motion from one wheel to the next. By turning a hand crank, the operator could move the entire system, simulating months and years, observing patterns that repeated in complex, predictable cycles. The mechanism was a marvel not because it performed magic, but because it translated celestial motion, abstract, distant, and invisible, into tangible rotations and readings that could be studied, recorded, and interpreted. To the maker, it required extraordinary knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and metallurgy, and a patient, careful hand to cut each gear to exact ratios so that months, years, and eclipses aligned correctly. Its discovery in a shipwreck near the island of Antikythera in the early 20th century revealed just how far ahead of its time the device truly was. For over a millennium, nothing quite like it appeared, and its intricacy astonished scholars. Over 30 gears, with epicyclic arrangements, working together in harmony to mirror the heavens. Each dial and pointer had meaning, carefully calibrated, silently tracking cycles that most people then, and even now, would find nearly invisible. The creation of such a device demanded both imagination and the quiet patience of someone willing to plan decades of rotations into a small, handheld instrument. Its construction was not hurried, each gear had to mesh perfectly, and even a small misalignment could ruin predictions. Although the Antikythera mechanism would be lost for centuries, its principle influenced the later development of astronomical clocks, gearing systems, and mechanical calculators. It reminds us that human curiosity often moves slowly, seeking patterns and precision long before technology allows us to replicate them easily. You may not care about a small bronze mechanism with gears tracking the stars. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the Antikythera mechanism shows that even in silence, and in the hidden rotation of tiny wheels, humans have always sought to understand time, movement, and the vast, distant cosmos. Patiently, carefully, and ever so slowly. Ah! My soft-thinking listener. Let us drift now, ever so gently, to Alexandria around 200 BC, where one of the quietest marvels of human curiosity first appeared, Heron's steam engine, also known as the Eolipile. Though small and more a curiosity than a practical device, it demonstrated the subtle power of steam in motion centuries before the industrial age. Heron's steam engine was a simple, yet clever, device consisting of a spherical vessel mounted to rotate freely on an axis. The sphere was hollow, with one or more bent nozzles protruding from its surface. Water inside the sphere was heated in a cauldron beneath it, producing steam that escaped through the nozzles. As steam jets shot out, the sphere rotated in the opposite direction, demonstrating the principle of action and reaction, an early glimpse of what centuries later would be formalized as Newton's third law of motion. To operate it, one needed only to maintain a steady fire beneath the water, and observe the slow, continuous spinning of the sphere. Its rotation was not rapid or dramatic, but methodical, mesmerizing in its gentle, ceaseless motion. Though it performed no useful work, the device illustrated the potential of steam to convert thermal energy into mechanical motion, a concept far ahead of its time. Heron designed the Eolipile as part of his larger explorations into automata and mechanical devices. He experimented with siphons, pulleys, and pressure, often creating small theatrical effects in temples or for educational demonstration. The steam engine itself was typically mounted on a stand above a heated cauldron, and the careful construction of the sphere required skill in shaping metal, sealing seams, and ensuring the nozzles directed steam effectively. The motion was continuous yet quiet, a subtle rotation that illustrated the invisible force of vaporized water. Observers might have seen only the gentle spinning, perhaps accompanied by faint hissing or the soft clink of metal, and yet, the principles behind it were profoundly instructive. It was, in essence, an early laboratory experiment disguised as a mesmerizing toy. Although Heron's steam engine was never adopted for practical work, it has inspired generations of engineers, historians, and dreamers who marveled at its elegant simplicity. Its principle, using steam to produce rotational motion, foreshadowed turbines, engines, and countless mechanical innovations. It is not loud, not forceful, not glamorous. Its achievement lies in quiet observation, subtle transformation, and patient experimentation. You may not care about a small, rotating metal sphere propelled by escaping steam. And that is completely fine. But I do. For Heron's Eolipile reminds us that even the most delicate curiosities can whisper truths about energy, motion, and the patient pursuit of understanding. Slowly, quietly, and ever so gently. Let us now drift very gently to Rome around 100 BC, where one of the quietest yet quietly enduring inventions first appeared, Roman concrete, a material that shaped the architecture of empires and survives remarkably even today. Though unassuming in appearance, gray, dusty, and solid, it held secrets that modern builders still study. Roman concrete was a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, and aggregates such as small stones, sand, or pieces of broken pottery. The volcanic ash, known as pozzolana, reacted with lime and water to create a chemical bond that could actually strengthen over time, particularly in marine environments. The mixture was poured into wooden forms to shape walls, aqueducts, harbors, and monumental structures, and then left to cure slowly. Unlike modern Portland cement, which can crack and degrade over decades, Roman concrete often lasted centuries, some examples surviving more than 2,000 years. The key to its durability lay in its self-healing properties. Microscopic cracks allowed water to seep in, triggering chemical reactions that gradually filled the gaps with new mineral deposits. This quiet, slow process meant that the concrete improved with age, a humble material that grew stronger simply by existing in its environment. Construction with Roman concrete required patient observation and careful proportioning. Builders had to measure lime and ash carefully, choose aggregates of the right size and density, and mix them with water until the consistency was neither too dry nor too runny. Wooden molds guided the formation of walls and arches, and workers sometimes tamped the mixture gently to remove air pockets. Harbors, in particular, benefited from submersion. Seawater reacted with the volcanic ash to form rare minerals, strengthening the bonds and creating structures capable of withstanding waves, tides, and storms. Observers walking along these harbors may have noticed only the smooth, gray surfaces, unaware of the slow, mineral-based reactions continuing quietly within. The process was methodical, repetitive, and utterly reliable. Though the principles of Roman concrete were largely forgotten for centuries, modern engineers study it as an exemplar of material ingenuity and long-term durability. Its quiet brilliance is in chemical patience, subtle reaction, and reliance on natural materials rather than complex machinery. It is not flashy. It does not sparkle or roar. Yet it allowed civilizations to rise, harbors to endure, and monuments to whisper across millennia. You may not care about a gray, hard substance poured into molds. And that is completely fine. But I do. For Roman concrete reminds us that even the simplest mixtures, sand, lime, and ash, can quietly endure through time, growing stronger without fuss, without fanfare, and ever so gently, like the slow heartbeat of history itself. Quietly moving on to China around 200 CE, where one of the quietest marvels of early observation first appeared, the Chinese seismograph, a device designed to detect the subtle tremors of the earth long before modern instruments existed. Though unassuming in appearance, large, bronze, and somewhat ornamental, it quietly recorded disturbances invisible to the eye. The Chinese seismograph, invented by Zhang Heng, was a large bronze vessel, often shaped like a wine urn, resting on a stable platform. Around its circumference were 8 dragons, each holding a small bronze ball in its mouth, with corresponding toads placed beneath, ready to receive any falling ball. Inside, a pendulum or inverted lever system was carefully balanced so that when an earthquake occurred, even at a distance, the mechanism would tilt subtly. The movement would dislodge a ball from the dragon's mouth, dropping it into the toad below. The direction in which the ball fell indicated the approximate direction of the quake. It was a quiet, slow, and delicate translation of invisible seismic energy into tangible, observable signals, a mechanical whisper of the Earth's hidden movements, allowing officials to respond with care to distant tremors. Operating and constructing the seismograph required great patience, precision, and understanding of balance. The internal mechanism, a kind of early pendulum, needed to be carefully centered so that it could respond to vibrations from multiple directions without tipping prematurely. The dragons and toads, though ornate, were functional indicators, each one aligned with a cardinal or intermediate direction, so that the falling ball would communicate useful information. The bronze had to be thick enough to hold its shape, but not so heavy that the internal mechanism would fail. Observers would stand quietly nearby, noting the dropped ball, perhaps adjusting the instrument or recording the event in meticulous detail. Its operation was repetitive, slow, and without spectacle, yet its accuracy was remarkable for the time. Though the seismograph would be largely forgotten for centuries, its principle remains inspiring, a mechanical device translating imperceptible motion into information humans could use. It is not loud, not flashy, not immediately gratifying. Its achievement lies in careful observation, patient craftsmanship, and the quiet translation of natural forces into tangible knowledge. You may not care about a bronze urn with dragons and falling balls. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the Chinese seismograph reminds us that even the softest mechanical whispers can alert us to the hidden movements of the world, patiently and gently, long before science formalized instruments, and ever so slowly teaching us to listen. To Byzantium around 300 CE, where one of the quietest yet curiously menacing inventions first appeared, the Greek fire projector. Though designed for naval warfare, it was a marvel of engineering, subtle and precise in its mechanics, quietly transforming ordinary ships into platforms of controlled flame. The Greek fire projector was essentially an early flamethrower, mounted on the decks of ships, designed to spray streams of flammable liquid at approaching vessels. Its construction was typically a bronze tube or nozzle connected to a reservoir containing the combustible mixture, which might include oils, resins, and other ingredients. Pressure was applied, often mechanically or with pumps, to force the liquid through the nozzle, igniting it as it exited. The mechanics were quiet, methodical, and careful. Engineers had to balance pressure, flow, and ignition so that the flame projected steadily without harming the operators. The nozzle itself was simple, yet clever, sometimes adjustable to control the range and spread of the fire. While visually dramatic, the true ingenuity was in the subtle control of materials and forces, translating stored chemical energy into a directed, continuous jet of flame. Operating a Greek fire projector required patience and precision. Crew members had to maintain the fuel mixture carefully, ensuring the viscosity and flammability were appropriate for smooth ejection. The bronze nozzles and pumps needed regular maintenance, as corrosion or clogs could render them ineffective. Fire was a dangerous companion, so sailors learned to manage the process slowly and deliberately, adjusting angles, monitoring pressure, and preparing for every use with meticulous care. The preparation was as much engineering as it was chemistry, careful blending, storing in containers, and steady application, repeated for each ship and deployment. Observers might have noticed only the quiet hiss of liquid, the gentle warm glow of flame at the nozzle's tip, and the disciplined motion of crew managing the device. Though the Greek fire projector would be lost to history after the fall of Byzantium, its principle influenced later designs of chemical warfare, pressurized fluid systems, and controlled combustion. It was not a toy, nor a decorative piece, yet it was not chaotic, either. Its brilliance lies in its quiet, patient orchestration of materials, mechanics, and human skill. You may not care about a ship-mounted tube spraying ignited liquid. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the Greek fire projector reminds us that even in destructive designs, there can be a subtle elegance, precise, measured, and patient, translating invisible chemical potential into controlled motion and effect. Slowly, quietly, and ever so gently. Let us now drift very gently to China around 500 CE, where one of the quietest and most methodical inventions first appeared, the chain pump, a device designed to lift water continuously with patient repetition. Though unassuming in appearance, wooden, toothed, and rotating, it quietly transformed irrigation, mining, and water management across the region. The chain pump consisted of a long loop of chain with a series of small containers or paddles attached at regular intervals, threaded over two wheels or drums. One wheel was placed in a well, river, or reservoir, and the other on the surface or higher ground. As the chain rotated, turned either by human labor, animals, or water wheels, the containers scooped water from the lower source and carried it upward, releasing it into irrigation channels or storage vessels. Its motion was slow and repetitive, a quiet rhythm of lift and release, a mechanical pulse that converted continuous rotation into gentle, incremental movement of liquid. The principle was simple yet ingenious. A single loop of chain, moved steadily, could transport water far more efficiently than buckets carried by hand, with patience replacing brute effort. Construction and operation of a chain pump required careful attention to materials and alignment. The wooden containers or scoops needed to be uniform to avoid jamming, chains had to be strong but flexible, sometimes reinforced with metal links. Wheels were carved or shaped carefully to guide the chain smoothly, and axles needed to be lubricated or greased to reduce friction. Operators had to maintain a steady pace, ensuring the chain did not slip or twist, and monitoring the continuous flow of water for any disruptions. The sound of operation, the gentle clatter of wood on wood, the subtle splash of water entering and leaving each container, was a soft companion to long hours of labor, hypnotic in its persistence. Even today, one might imagine the repetitive motion, slowly lifting each droplet upward, endlessly and quietly, like a mechanical heartbeat in a serene landscape. Though the chain pump eventually fell out of use outside Asia, its principle of continuous, mechanically assisted water lifting endured in various designs and innovations, from European mills to modern irrigation systems. Its brilliance lies not in spectacle, but in quiet persistence, reliability, and careful coordination of simple components. It is not flashy, loud, or particularly exciting. Yet it quietly reshaped agriculture, mining, and human control of water. You may not care about a wooden chain turning slowly to lift water. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the chain pump reminds us that even repetitive, unremarkable motion, carefully observed, patiently executed, can carry life-giving water across fields, steadily, methodically, and ever so gently. Drifting gently to China around 700 CE, where one of the quietest and most deliberate inventions first appeared, the paddle wheel boat. Though unassuming and free from steam or engines, it quietly transformed water transportation by harnessing human or animal power to rotate wheels, moving vessels steadily through rivers and canals. The paddle wheel boat consisted of a series of large wooden wheels mounted along the sides or rear of a vessel, each fitted with evenly spaced paddles. As the wheels rotated, the paddles pushed against water, producing forward motion. Rotation was powered by treadmills operated by humans or animals, or sometimes by simple mechanical gearing connected to cranks. The principle was slow but reliable. Each turn of the wheel displaced a small volume of water, and the cumulative effect moved the boat forward steadily. Observers might notice only the gentle splash of paddles entering and leaving the river, the quiet creak of axles, and the rhythmic motion of laborers powering the wheels, yet this simple mechanism allowed boats to traverse long distances against currents without relying on sails or wind. Construction of the paddle wheel boat required careful attention to proportion, balance, and durability. The wheels needed to be large enough to push water efficiently, yet light enough not to overburden the vessel. Paddles had to be shaped for smooth entry and exit, minimizing resistance while maximizing displacement. Axles were mounted securely, sometimes lubricated with oils or animal fat to reduce friction, and the gearing system translating human or animal effort into wheel rotation had to be finely tuned. Operators maintained a steady pace, walking or turning treadmills in unison, ensuring the water was pushed evenly. The sound of operation, the soft sloshing, the creak of timber, the quiet hum of coordinated labor, was hypnotic in its repetitiveness, like a mechanical lullaby echoing across the river. Though paddle-wheel boats would be largely forgotten in Europe until the 18th century, their principle endures in modern watercraft and industrial paddle systems. Their brilliance is in the quiet orchestration of simple machines, human endurance, and repetitive motion to achieve continuous propulsion. It is not flashy, noisy, or immediately impressive, yet it transformed transportation by exploiting patient, controlled effort. You may not care about a wooden wheel turning in water. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the paddle wheel boat reminds us that even the simplest mechanical motions, repeated steadily over time, can carry not only people and goods, but also the quiet ingenuity of civilizations across rivers and centuries, slowly, methodically, and ever so gently. Now to the Frankish Empire around 800 CE, where one of the quietest yet quietly transformative inventions first appeared, the Carolingian polyptych. Though it may seem mundane, pages of ink on parchment, it quietly shaped the way humans kept track of resources, labor, and wealth, long before modern accounting. The Carolingian polyptych was, at its core, a written ledger documenting estates, lands, and the obligations of tenants. Monks or clerks meticulously recorded quantities of grain, livestock, and labor owed, alongside notes on rents and services. Each entry was carefully aligned in rows and columns, a quiet precursor to the more formalized double-entry bookkeeping that would appear centuries later. The pages were often made of durable parchment, and ink was derived from natural sources such as soot or plant dyes. The act of recording was slow, deliberate, and repetitive. A scribe would copy numbers and names carefully, checking calculations, adjusting entries, and ensuring consistency. The process may have seemed boring, but it was a marvel of order, transforming scattered knowledge of estates and labor into a coherent, understandable system, almost meditative in its repetition and quiet attention to detail. Constructing a polyptych required patience and precision. Clerks had to be trained in numeracy and careful observation, often working by candlelight or daylight filtering through monastery windows. Pages were ruled with faint lines to guide columns and prevent errors. Errors were corrected with gentle strokes of ink, and totals double-checked by multiple hands. The layout itself reflected subtle understanding of proportional organization, grouping estates, servants, and resources in a way that made them legible and functional. Even the act of turning each page was quiet, deliberate, a tactile reminder of the methodical process unfolding slowly across time. Observers might notice only the scratching of quill, the soft rustle of parchment, and the gentle cadence of calculation, yet within this quiet monotony lay the foundation of modern accounting. Though the Carolingian polyptych would eventually be replaced by more advanced accounting systems, its principle, careful, methodical recording of resources and obligations, remains enduring. It is not dazzling, explosive, or immediately exciting, yet it allowed estates to function efficiently and rulers to understand their domains. Its brilliance lies in patience, repetition, and quiet observation of details. You may not care about a parchment ledger listing grain and labor. And that is completely fine. But I do. For the Carolingian polyptych reminds us that even the dullest lists, carefully maintained, can quietly organize societies, preserve knowledge, and lay the foundation for systems that endure for centuries. Slowly, meticulously, and ever so gently. Ah! My soft-thinking listener. Let us now drift gently to China around 900 CE, where one of the quietest yet surprisingly practical inventions first appeared, paper armor. Though it may sound delicate, it provided protection for warriors through layered ingenuity rather than brute strength. Paper armor was composed of multiple layers of paper, carefully pressed, glued, and often lacquered to form rigid sheets. These sheets were then sewn or bound together to create garments covering the torso, limbs, and sometimes even the neck. The lacquer added both waterproofing and additional rigidity, allowing the paper to resist cuts, slashes, and minor impacts. Unlike metal armor, it was surprisingly light, flexible, and relatively easy to repair. Soldiers could carry and wear it for extended periods without the fatigue associated with heavier protective gear. The quiet ingenuity lay not in strength alone, but in the careful layering, adhesion, and treatment of the paper, a repetitive, methodical process that transformed humble sheets into functional protection, demonstrating patience, foresight, and a keen understanding of materials. Constructing paper armor required meticulous attention to detail. Artisans had to select paper of uniform thickness, sometimes layering up to 20 sheets per panel. Lacquer had to be applied evenly, with sufficient drying time between coats to avoid warping or brittleness. Each panel was cut and assembled carefully to allow movement while minimizing exposed gaps. Fastening involved precise stitching or binding, ensuring the layers remained stable under strain. The rhythmic process of layering, lacquering, and stitching was slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic, with craftsmen observing subtle changes in flexibility, moisture content, and adhesion. The resulting armor was a quiet triumph of patience and material science, functioning effectively without relying on heavy metals or forging. Though eventually replaced by steel and iron armor, paper armor's principle, using careful layering and treatment to achieve protective strength, remains an inspiring example of resourceful engineering. It is not flashy, not metallic, not immediately attention-grabbing. Its brilliance lies in careful observation, repetition, and the transformation of mundane materials into functional objects. You may not care about lacquered sheets of paper sewn into armor. And that is completely fine. But I do. For paper armor reminds us that even the most unassuming materials, patiently prepared and thoughtfully assembled, can provide defense, utility, and quiet ingenuity. Slowly, meticulously, and ever so gently. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.